Hello, everyone. I'm Esther Vida, and welcome to Politics is Sexy. I'm joined by Tom Farmer, former executive producer with CNN and formerly with Face the Facts USA. And we've got columnist and author Rich Rubino. Good evening, gentlemen.
Good evening.
Good evening, Esther. Hey, Rich.
First, I should mention we're taping this on a very, very historic and special day. It's Rich Rubino's birthday, so happy birthday to you, Rich Rubino. As Tom,
day after the birthday, but
day after. Well, okay, it's still the week of Rich Rubino. We've got lots to talk about. What's going on in Mobile, Alabama, and Atlanta, Georgia, with this little minor snowstorm. Plus, we're going to take a look at immigration reform and Republicans' retreat to take a look at how to go forward. But we begin with the State of the Union. President Barack Obama, 44th, delivers a State of the Union. I want an initial reaction from you guys. You know, lots of noise out there about people reacting. What's your biggest takeaway, Tom?
A very small speech. You know, the striking thing about these speeches is that they feel great at the time. You get caught up in the pomp and circumstance of the moment, and then the next morning you wake up and you can't remember a darn thing he said. And if you look at the aspirations for this administration in year one, and in fact the contrast between the last couple of years and this year, you see just how small this speech really was. Last year there was a lot of talk about the imperative for gun control in this country. We were just a month or so after a Newtown. This year, nothing, because he couldn't make it happen. Last year there was talk about raising the minimum wage. This year, very same talk, because nothing has happened. Last year, talk about equal pay for working women. This year, the very same sentence, because nothing has happened. As the administration spirals towards its last 2 or 3 years, it seems the aspirations get more and more modest.
And Rich, this was a long speech, over an hour long, and TV viewership very low. I think it's back in since 2000, it hasn't been this low. Has this just become another way of getting political posturing out there and using, you know, the little airwaves that he had to get whatever ideas he still has to come across?
Yeah, well, I mean, he's following, protocol. Every president since Woodrow Wilson, actually, it was begun by Washington and the Constitution doesn't say that the president has to actually go to the well of the House and deliver it. That was actually began by Washington and Adams. Then Jefferson thought it was too imperial, so he decided not to do it. And every president up until Woodrow Wilson did not do it. And then in 1913, Wilson decided to do it. But it's a very imperial spectacle. You see, they're announcing, ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States. He goes up, shakes everyone's hands, and then the Speaker announces the President again. And I mean, it's really a made-for-TV event. Very little actually gets done. Very little is actually accomplished. I think people, you see that people know exactly what he's going to say for the most part. I think that what's interesting specifically about this address reminds me a little bit of Bill Clinton in 1995. If you look at 93, 94, he had a very ambitious domestic agenda, the stimulus package, healthcare reform. In 95, when the Republicans took control of the Congress, he realized he wasn't going to get much of that, so he had to go a lot more small bore, kind of micro-governing, if you will. I think Obama's really taking a page. What I actually said a few weeks back was he needs to instead take a page from Bill Clinton's playbook, because it's very hard to get much legislation passed through a Republican Congress, specifically in an election year when Republicans running for re-election certainly don't want to be associated with Barack Obama, except for very few moderate Republicans, which are very de minimis right now, and certainly conservative Democrats like Mark Pryor and Mary Landrieu don't want to necessarily be seen voting for things that Obama did, so that Obama supported. So what he's doing is he's going very small bore. For example, signing a minimum wage increase for federally contracted workers.
Right.
Now, the question the average person would ask would be, well, if all he has to do is use a pen to accomplish that, why didn't he do it his first day in office?
Let me just ask Tom about that, about these 10 executive orders that he signed into law. Questions from the Speaker Boehner to Michelle Bachmann, whether this is constitutionally allowed. What do you say, Tom?
The questions are ridiculous, because Republican presidents and Bill Clinton in between, the two Bush eras, issued executive orders at a much more rapid rate than Barack Obama has. They didn't quack and complain so much when George W. Bush was issuing flurries of executive orders. The real question is what it does to the working relationship between the president and the Congress. And as we've said in this space many times, the president doesn't seem to have any facility for personal connections. He doesn't have much appetite for the politics of arm twisting and coalition building, which make legislation, which make governing possible. And the threat to go over everyone's heads and essentially say, I'll pass what I can with you, but I'll do what I can alone when you don't want to play. That's not calculated to improve the working atmosphere for the last 3 years of administration. The complaints from the Republicans are specious, but the tactic from the administration is unwise.
And it's funny, you go back.
Go ahead.
I'm just saying, you go back to two presidents that would use as a precedent. One of them is Lyndon Johnson, who knew everyone in Congress and knew where all the bodies were buried, knew what arm to twist, how to get the United States senators to pass this legislation. That was the Civil Rights Act. And the other one is Gerald Ford, who had spent 25 years in the House of Representatives, became minority leader, and was on good working relationship with Tip O'Neill and Carl Albert and the Democratic leadership. Obama doesn't seem to have any real relations with literally any members of Congress, which is really surprising because when he was in the Illinois State Senate, one of his specialties was having relations with Republicans. He'd play cards with them. The Republicans, Kurt Dillard, a state senator from Illinois, the Republicans in Illinois State Senate actually absolutely loved him. I talked to Jim Edgar, who was Republican governor in Illinois one time. He said, yeah, he was kind of a good old boy in many respects. So it's very, I think, odd that since he became president, he became somewhat aloof and somewhat standoffish.
Well, do you think,
opposed to what I think he could have been?
Well, do you think is aloof, or he's, from my perspective, I see him taking to the streets and barnstorming all these states and connecting with the people and almost counting on social media and the public to get that pressure onto Congress. What do you guys make of that?
Yeah, but I think a lot of that.
Go ahead, Tom.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Tom.
No. There's a huge difference between making soaring speeches and appearing before hand-picked, adoring crowds, and as Rich says, doing the dirty business of legislating, twisting arms, log rolling, horse trading, getting things done, finding out what your trading partner's vulnerabilities are, and sticking it to them when you have to. That's how the sausage gets made, and that he doesn't want to do. I will tell you that I still have friends in network television who travel with the president. And they say that while he very much enjoys appearing on a closed stage and being adored by crowds at a distance, he is so standoffish about pressing the flesh and working the rope line that they've actually had to shorten the rope line so he doesn't have to spend so much time there. Bill Clinton, you couldn't tear him away from the rope line. You had to haul him back into the car with a stick. And Obama has to be practically physically pushed in that direction to go shake a few hands. He doesn't like it. So you got a guy who doesn't like the public in an up-close and personal sense and doesn't like the legislative process. And you got to wonder what propelled him into this besides the free food and the nice airplane.
But it's interesting, though, because historically that has not been Barack Obama. I mean, when he was at Harvard Law School, for example, and he became the president of the Harvard Law Review, he was a very sociable person. He had friends that were Republicans. He had friends that were Democrats. That's part of how he got elected. A lot of Republicans said that I've actually talked to somebody who went to Harvard Law School with him. He said that his brilliance in law school was to know exactly what the other side stood for and know exactly how to propitiate, kind of how to work with them. In the Illinois State Senate, the same way. His first 2 years in the United States Senate before he started running for president, he worked with Tom Coburn, one of the most conservative members of the United States Senate, on government accountability. He worked with Dick Lugar of Indiana on nuclear disarmament. So, I mean, he has a history of this. That's what's so interesting, that as a president, he has not continued that.
Go ahead.
And the one response I have, at least on the Harvard point, is that the one thing people at Harvard have in common, whether they are Republicans or Democrats, is they're all from Harvard. And it's not exactly a cross-section of American society. It's a very rarefied, top-tier elite segment of the population. And that, I think, is where the president is most comfortable. When he's got to go yuck it up with people who run diners or who are mechanics who are out of work or are working 3 jobs and getting a pasta money together on a dollar-by-dollar basis, I don't think he's that comfortable with that aspect of the job.
Very interesting.
And I will say this about the president. A lot of those trips that he made in his first term, inadvertent were in places like Ohio, Pennsylvania, North Carolina. They were essentially political trips, essentially on the public dime. He would go to a swing state and he would take a tour, of states like North Carolina, Ohio, New Hampshire, states that were, showdown states. And he would visit those states and essentially be giving a speaking tour. So it would really be a campaign speech that he was delivering. He'd be sometimes talking about things that were very popular, that poll tested very well.
Yeah.
Like that was a lot of what he was doing. Now he's doing it more or less. I can't really figure out. I guess it's just to try to persuade the people to go over the heads of the lawmakers. When you're not that popular, then it's kind of hard to have the people calling up the lawmakers, especially when you're doing it in congressional district. The lawmakers are with you anyways, so it's kind of defeats the purpose. It's
okay.
Just to continue to get them out there all the day.
Let's move on to the Republicans who went on a retreat in Maryland this week to try to figure out how to move forward. And it sounds like, Tom, there may be a immigration reform bill out there. Of course, the Senate passed one last June. And it sounds like Speaker Boehner wants to do more of a piecemeal deal in his bill. What are your thoughts?
Well, it looks like they're going to try something, which is really interesting, even though the militant wing of the party is dead set against it. And there are two imperatives here. The first is that the president has asked for a year of action, and the Republican caucus this morning said, all right, let's have a year of action. They can't be seen as opposing action of any kind. It goes back to the point we've made here about how they got to start standing for something and not against everything. So they have to be seen working on this stuff. The other thing is that the Republican Party, as we've said, faces a simple mathematics problem where if they don't do something to attract people of color and Latinos, they are putting themselves out of business. There are 11 million undocumented immigrants in this country who might as well be taxpayers. If we could get them signed up and get them on the rolls and get them to kick in a little money to help fund Social Security and keep the roads paved, it would be better for everyone.
Why not?
What's wrong with that? Only the outliers in the Republican Party seem to think this is a terrible idea. Even Cantor today signaled that he doesn't think this is the worst thing in the world. So it looks like something is going to happen. But what it does to the state of the caucus and to what extent the militant outliers, go berserk and can't be satisfied, it's a different question.
And so
what doesn't matter.
What is Speaker Boehner to do, Rich?
Well, I think Speaker Boehner, and we saw this when he took on the Tea Party in the Murray-Paul Ryan vote, I think he's looking in many respects right now for a legacy as Speaker. He doesn't just want to be the Speaker who spent his entire time trying to propitiate the kind of Tea Party bloodline in his party. I think in many respects it's similar to Newt Gingrich. Newt Gingrich came in, ran a very conservative platform in '94, but then he started working with Bill Clinton on a lot of things, and as a result, some of the Republican caucus on the right kind of peeled off, and some actually tried to rebel against him for saying that he worked too much with the Democrats. I think that's what John Boehner's looking at. Look, politically, for John Boehner, this is not a good thing. First of all, he has Eric Gurr running against him in the primary in Ohio. Freedom Works and a lot of these conservative organizations, which do not like John Boehner, are going to put a lot of money into his primary opponent to make him spend a lot more time back home in Ohio. Not that he's necessarily going to lose, but just the fact that it's going to be embarrassing if he gets less than 60% in his own district and went 65% for Mitt Romney last time. And they also, assuming the Republicans continue to keep control of the House, and I think that's 99% certainty right now, but as close to 100% certainty as you can get, he has the possibility of the Tea Party enough Tea Party members not voting for him for Speaker, and he will not be Speaker anymore. He'll be a backbencher. So this does not help him politically. But as I say, I think John Boehner is looking for some sort of a legacy. I don't think he wants to be seen as one of a long line of speakers who, speakers like David Henderson, for example, who was Speaker for 6 years. But does anyone remember who David Henderson was?
I don't. Let me ask you guys. I want to ask you convince me. Let me ask you. Do you think in this year we will have a bill for the president to sign, an immigration bill? Can the House come up with something? The House Republicans can come up with something that Democrats will vote for it, and then will the House and Senate agree on it? And will the president like it? So, Tom, let's start out with you. Why not? Will there or will not be a immigration reform bill in 2014? Go ahead.
The answer to all your questions is yes. The House will pass immigration legislation. It will go to conference with the Senate, and they'll have a successful compromise bill, which the president will sign. The Democrats dare not oppose this just because it makes the Republicans more incrementally more attractive to the electorate. The Democrats have been pushing for this for years and years, and here comes their best shot. The House vote will have to include a majority of Democrats and probably about half to three quarters of the Republican caucus, but eventually, yes, it'll pass. And believe me, the Republicans want this because it is key to their taking back the Senate, which they intend to do this fall. And they have a lot of people up for votes in states like Texas, where you have an immigrant population that at least influences people who can vote. So you got to go through with it.
Very interesting. Of all the things the president talked about. Okay, Rich Rubino, yes or no?
Yeah, this will be the one, I think, flagship piece of legislation for the year that will pass, but I think it will be very scaled down, very incremental, specifically tailor-made so that the Republicans running for election, a lot of these people have Tea Party primary challenges right now. People like Bud Schuster in Pennsylvania, for example, can say they have to be able to have a legislation that these Republicans can go back to their constituents, specifically very conservative constituents in conservative districts of some of the most conservative people in the nation, and they have to go back and say this is not amnesty, say we're bringing them to the back of the line, and they have to be somewhat believable in that. So it's going to be very, very incremental. And you also have the problem, by the way, of the Democrats. Now, I think in the House of Representatives, I think most Democrats are going to vote for it. There's only 14 blue dogs left. And of those 14, 3 of them aren't running for re-election. So they have the liberty to vote for it. In the Senate, though,
Rich.
they need to get 60 votes. So the short answer is yes, but it's very scaled down, very it's not going to be major, but this will be the flagship piece of legislation Obama will sign this year.
You've convinced me. It's definitely I think it will be very incremental, if anything. And my question to you guys, to follow up on what Rich just said, is, how do you balance giving the Dreamers, a pathway to citizenship and sending people behind in the back of the line? How do you balance that out in a bill that works and cuts down on some of the issues that we've been having as a country on illegal immigration?
Well, the Republican Party holds the answer in their own hand. They can put themselves out of business the quick way or the slow way. The slow way is to avoid the Dreamer agenda, as it were, and keep demonizing the 11 million and find themselves a tiny minority of angry older white men. The other way to do this is to, as Rich says, do incremental legislation which gets you more voters than it loses. You got to do the math. For every enraged 65-year-old far-gone blogger writing about conspiracies who hates the whole idea, there are probably 2 or 3 young Latino entrepreneurs in states like Texas and New Mexico who can be convinced that perhaps this is a party of opportunity. So, man, I'd make that trade. I think you have to risk making the trade. Otherwise, you go down like the Titanic.
Oh, very interesting. Go ahead, Rich.
One problem the Republicans do have, though, is a lot of, specifically, if you look at some of the polls, Latino voters are the most enthusiastic about the Affordable Care Act, for example. So you wonder if a lot of, for example, undocumented immigrants or illegal immigrants become citizens, will they vote Democrat just for the pure reason of the Affordable Care Act? They also tend to be a lot more sympathetic to government social services, so it could be kind of a double-edged sword for the Republicans in that respect. But I will say this for the Republicans, in terms of trying to get moderate Republicans, independents, weak Democrats to their cause, being seen as intolerant certainly does not help their cause at all. So, but it is a trade-off in many respects, and you also have the possibility of in 2016, and this is somewhat remote, but you do have the possibility of some Tea Party folks walking out of the convention. I mean, you saw that there has been history of that where the party was just unreconcilable. For example, in 1948. Over the civil rights issue, a lot of the
states' rights,
less than conservative states' rights people moved to states' rights people literally at the convention said good day and walked out.
Wow,
it's a remote possibility, but it is something that to have some trepidation.
But again, it's math. If you can afford to lose that 10 or 15% of the party, but you think you can win the presidency with a Rubio on the ticket or the mayor of San Antonio, whose name I've sadly dropped, but is a dynamic young Republican. I mean, there are people out there that you can use to build a bigger tent. And the central problem with Tea Partyism is it's not ever a bigger tent. It's a smaller and smaller tent, which excommunicates people all the time. It's the kind of thing Ronald Reagan would be horrified by, because it's not how you win elections or build coalitions or get anything done. And that's what the party is up against now.
And so what do you think those Tea Partiers are going to be doing going forward? I'm switching a little bit with regards to Obamacare. President Obama said during his State of the States, you've tried upteen times to repeal it. It hasn't worked. Move on, essentially, is what he said. What do you think the Republicans, specifically Tea Party faction, is going to be with regards to Obamacare going forward? Tom?
For the Republican leadership, the answer to that question is, well, who cares? If you watch the response to the State of the Union address by the Republican congresswoman from Washington State, they didn't talk about repealing Obamacare. There was no Michelle Bachmann rhetoric in there. There's no discussion of this anymore. It's a done deal. It's a mess, and as we've talked about here, it is going to take years to straighten out and cost a lot of people a lot of time and money, but it's not going to be ripped out by the roots. And if you have, as we've said, if you have 15 or 20% of the party that doesn't like it and wants it repealed, they can go off in a corner and repeal it among themselves over and over again. I mean, anything's going to happen meaningful on the broad political stage. It's going to be adjusted as it runs.
Okay.
Yeah, just a quick thing. First of all, the mayor of San Antonio, actually, the one who gave the address, it was actually Julian Castro. He's actually a Democrat, the mayor from San Diego. He's the one who has the twin that's a member of, that got elected as a member of Congress. He's the one that gave the keynote address at the 2012 Democratic Convention. And
even on your birthday, you're full of all these surprising facts. Okay, go ahead. And secondly,
we're talking about, and secondly, in terms of the Tea Party issue, one thing the Republicans do have to worry about is turnout on the base, specifically the conservative intelligentsia. Certainly Rush Limbaugh, certainly Ann Coulter, certainly Michael Savage. A lot of these people are going to say, don't go out and vote. And the question is, do they go out and vote, or do they choose lesser of two evils, or does some sort of a third party on the right, kind of like the American Party in '68 with George Wallace, some sort of a party like that could potentially siphon, 7-8% of the vote? Does that potentially form for one or two elections? The question is just from a practical standpoint. If you form that party, are you just benefiting the Democrats? But there are some people I think are just going to be so frustrated, and certainly John Boehner, Mitch McConnell, the leadership of the Republican Party is not very popular within the conservative intelligentsia and the conservative base right now.
Let's move on. What in the world happened in Mobile, Alabama and Atlanta, Georgia? I was watching the news and I'm thinking, I saw scenes like this in India, not the United States of America. 2.6 inches of snow, putting some towns and the 9th largest city to a complete standstill. Tom, this just, keeps adding to that narrative of distrust and dysfunction of government.
Well, it's not just Mobile. It's about 6 states, stretching from New Orleans on up through Alabama and Georgia to the Carolinas, but a huge swath of land, millions of people. Atlanta has been the poster child for snow management dysfunction because that's where the CNN cameras are. CNN is right in the middle of Atlanta. When I worked there, the joke always was, no matter what was going on in the world, if it snowed in Atlanta, boy, that's the lead story across the network, because that's what struck the managers as important. This time it really is a lead story for a lot bigger question, a lot bigger reason. It's the small, relatively small anecdote which reveals the bigger narrative in American life. And nothing works here anymore. There's nothing to trust anymore. Go back 10 years to Katrina. Go back to untold hurricanes and natural disasters. Try to get out of O'Hare on a Friday afternoon when there are thunderstorms going down. Stuff doesn't work. You can't get anybody on the phone. You can't get anyone to take responsibility. Americans are slowly taking on board the idea that it really is every man for himself in an emergency. You can no longer count on institutions, public or private, to come to your rescue or get you out of trouble or issue meaningful instructions. One of the amazing sidelights of the Atlanta thing was that so much of the rescue work was done by private citizens acting on their own.
Yeah.
There's a very nice woman who started a Facebook page called Snowed Out Atlanta, which became the coordination hub for people who needed shelter and had to get their kids candy bars and stuff. And they did more good on the fly than all these high-paid government bureaucrats did, quacking around in situation rooms and holding press conferences. It's getting so, we feel we don't need these people. And it flies in the face of the central conceit of the progressive movement in this country, which is we need big government to do big things. For years and years now, when big government has been asked to do anything, it hasn't really stepped up. And in Atlanta, they struck out spectacularly.
Yeah. Well, that's actually an incredible point about, I think, the whole way that society in the United States is going. And that's right, Tom, individuals doing things for others. But Rich, I want to ask you about, this sort of blame game. The governor finally tonight set the buck stops with him. But earlier in the week, they were blaming the weather, people. When is Atlanta? Let's just talk about Atlanta. And Tom, you're right. A few other states were affected, but this isn't the first time that happened in Atlanta. What was at play? 2011, similar things happened after a storm. What needs to happen, Rich?
Well, I actually keep going back to New Orleans. In terms of Katrina, you had Mayor Nagin blaming the governor, you had the governor blaming the president. It just kind of went back and forth, and everyone was trying to say, this is your jurisdiction. The roads, for example, well, those are state roads, yet they're running through Atlanta. And you have the issue of the Atlanta mayor speaking, but you got to remember that Atlanta's only got about 500,000 people. It's a huge county. A lot of people live in the surrounding counties around Atlanta. You think of Atlanta having the biggest airport and everything else, but there's a lot of stuff going on right around Atlanta, and a lot of those people weren't as on the forefront. The mayor took somewhat of a bad rap just because he represents one city, and it's the one city that most people know of. But I think that you wonder why people are. This is somewhat tangentially related, but you wonder there are a lot of survivalists in this country, and this certainly speaks to the libertarian ethos. You wonder why people are buying gold, why people are stocking up on food, because there are people who are legitimately afraid that the government is feckless right now. They're afraid, for example, that we have a fiat currency that other countries aren't going to recognize it, and all their life savings that's put in all these fiat currency is going to be virtually meaningless. They're worried about inflation, and this just sort of plays into that. This definitely plays into that master kind of libertarian narrative. It's the greatest thing for the Libertarian Party since we left the gold standard.
Let me just say this. First of all, I think it's wise to have a couple of weeks' worth of food and water on hand. I live in an earthquake zone. Of course, we have emergency kit. That doesn't make me a survivalist. It makes you reasonable. Second, if you look at the broad meta narrative of attitude towards government over the last 60 or 70 years, there was a time after the New Deal and the tail end of the Roosevelt years when Bill Bureaucrat was a folk hero. People liked Bill Bureaucrat. He was going to come around and do good things for you. And by the time the 60s and 70s rolled around, trust in government kind of waned, but government was a sort of annoying background noise. It was sort of a Tonight Show joke, how difficult the government is. Now, we're in an era where people genuinely feel the government is here to hurt you, is here to make your life appreciably worse and do damage. And you see it in the NSA surveillance debate. You see it when emergency services fall flat, as they did in Atlanta this week. You see it in the Chris Christie thing, where government is willing to inconvenience thousands of bridge commuters to score inside baseball points. It's a very dangerous and unfortunate situation where people stop thinking, government's annoying but kind of benign, to, government is a real threat to our way of life. And that is the seed for a more serious electoral revolution than we've seen so far, and I think it may be in the way.
And Tom, you forgot to mention Obamacare, where thousands of people were turned away from some of their coverage. We've only got a couple minutes left. Rich, I want to start out with you. You got to convince me. What are we missing? What are we not talking about? But should we? 30 seconds, Rich.
Well, I just wanted, if I could just follow up on that a little bit. I think where I trace kind of the loss of America's innocence, I think the last time the federal government did really big things was 64 and 65 at the Great Society, the War on Poverty, the Civil Rights Act, Medicare. It's amazing these were all passed within, 2 years, for example, the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. Where I think we began to lose our innocence was in Vietnam, and then which was subsequently followed right by Watergate, and then by the Iranian hostage crisis and Iran-Contra. And I think that is part of why Americans have really lost faith in their government. There's just been a string of essentially failures, but I think that was the last time when you really saw government do big things. Was right with bipartisan support, by the way, was right around 64, 65, and I think we've been on the low ebb. And the question is, will the vicissitude go up? And right now, I don't see any evidence of that. I think its faith in government is continuing to decrease.
Okay. On that note, Rich Rubino, 30 seconds of something that we should be talking about. What races? What are you watching?
Oh yes, I could do that. Yes, it's interesting. I've talked to you before about how John Boehner has an opponent, Mitch McConnell has an opponent, and Scott Bevin. Now Eric Cantor, the person who at one point was known as kind of the liaison to the Tea Party, Eric Bratt, an economics professor, is now running against him. And watch with specifically with Cantor's support for the budget agreement, and now his sort of wavering on this immigration thing. Watch Freedom Works and Heritage Action PAC, and a lot of these organizations really I think running against him as well and trying to fund against him as well. I think the entire leadership of the Republican Party is going to have to watch their back in their own primary, which is really interesting this time around.
Wow. Okay, Tom Farmer.
All right, what are we missing, Esther? I think we're not talking enough about Cheerios. There is this cute little commercial that makes the rounds where a little girl goes and sprinkles Cheerios on her sleeping dad's chest to make him live a long time. And in the background is the fact that the guy is black and the mom is white. And it's not ever made an issue in the ad. It's excited a lot of racist anger in the lunatic fringe in this country. Well, MSNBC tweeted out about the ad. Maybe the right wing will hate it, but everybody else will go, "Aw, the adorable new Cheerios ad." MSNBC probably shouldn't have done that, partly because the ad's already been around for months, partly because they've done a lot of stupid things, shooting themselves in the foot lately. But the RNC, the Republicans now, are offended by the MSNBC tweet about the right wing hating biracial Cheerio-eating families, and the RNC says it's going to boycott MSNBC. Mm-hmm. To which the obvious answer is, how will they tell? It's not their enormous Republican audience is probably not going to be affected much. But anyway, it's a cute story and it's a cute commercial.
Yeah, but with an unhappy ending because that person from MSNBC got fired for that tweet or dismissed. So not a great ending.
Maybe it's not so unhappy.
By the way, just one interesting quick side note. Did anyone notice that the Republican retreat was held in Cambridge, Maryland, of all places? If John Boehner is trying to propitiate the right wing of the party, the last place you want to hold your retreat is in a city named Cambridge and get everyone's subconscious to think Cambridge, to think that John Boehner has somehow become Robert Reich or something. Just interesting, I thought.
Unless you hold it in New Haven or Princeton.
Exactly. All right, gentlemen, great discussion once again. Great discussion, Rich Rubino, Tom Farmer. We'll see you next week for another edition of Politics is Sexy. And make sure you check us out on Facebook, and we'll see you back here next week. Bye, guys.